Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with some really cool Debussy transcriptions. I'm talking about one disc specifically. It's been out for a while, but it's marvelous, and I just wanted to draw your attention to it. This is Debussy Transcriptions featuring the Orchestra Symphonique de Québec under Yoav Talmi. It's on the ATMA label. And it's got some really interesting stuff on it, that some of which you may not have heard, and I think it's worth talking about, and you should certainly hear it one way or another. Now, Debussy transcription is kind of a cottage industry in the classical music world, and it has been since Debussy's own day, because it's interesting for a composer who was as gifted as he was as a writer for the orchestra. He had a curious indifference to actually undertaking the work involved in orchestrating large-scale works. I mean, we know, his orchestral music, it all fits basically on two discs, right? There's La Mer, the Nocturnes, the Image, the Afternoon of a Faun, and a few other little things. I mean, the ballets, there's Je, and other stuff was orchestrated by other people. And he was perfectly happy with that, it seems, and they did a very good job, often under his own supervision. So he was comfortable with it. Since that time, other composers have tried their hand at orchestrating Debussy. Now, on this disc, let's talk about what we get. You get the Children's Corner Suite, which is in a very well-known orchestration by André Caplet. And you also get the Petite Suite, orchestrated by Henri Bousset. Both of those are well known, and they've entered the standard repertoire as effectively Debussy works. Even though they were orchestrated by other hands, they're often included in collections of the Debussy orchestral work. But also here, and quite interesting, the Sarabande and Danse, orchestrated by Ravel, that often shows up in Ravel collections, because Ravel, of course, was an orchestrator par excellence. And you also get, this is wonderful, the 6 antique epigraphs, 6 épigraphes antiques, orchestrated by Ernest Ansermet. Now, these works were also orchestrated by Rudolf Escher, and you might be able to find that orchestration as well. This is a late work, originally written for 2 pianos and then later arranged for 1 piano. So its medium, let's just say, was fluid. And Ansermet's orchestration is absolutely terrific. And I want to play you a little bit of it. They are, the 6 épigraphes all have different evocative titles. They are Pour évoquer Pan, Dieu de vent d'été. I mean, to summon Pan, the god of the summer wind. What's not to love, right? But the one I'm going to play you is the Pour la danseuse au crotale. That's, for the dancer, female dancer, with crotales. And here is just a little bit of that. It's a really sensitive arrangement, and I really think these pieces should be much better known. Ansermet himself recorded them for Decca, but this is, of course, in much better sound. Anyway, here we go. A lovely work, and for those of you who don't think Debussy wrote enough orchestral music, it's really something worth having, because you get a whole other Debussy orchestral thing. It's about 15, 16 minutes long for the whole batch of them. And then finally, we get the Soirée dans Grenade from Étampes, orchestrated by Henri Bousset. The Soirée in Granada, really a beautiful, beautiful piece. But finally, what really makes this disc, I think, a little bit unusual and oodles of fun is that the classic Clair de Lune appears twice, once orchestrated by André Caplet and once orchestrated by none other than Leopold Stokowski. Cool, huh? And it's actually very, very interesting to compare them. And that is precisely what I propose to do. So here is the Clair de Lune with orchestrated by Caplet. Now this is the arrangement that we normally hear, the more famous of the various arrangements of this piece. Here is André Caplet. And here is the same music as arranged by Leopold Stokowski. Now, I don't know about you, but I was surprised by the Stokowski. First of all, I actually think it's more colorful than Caplet, which doesn't surprise me because Stokowski was Stokowski, right? I mean, he was, the wizard of, flashy orchestration. But what really interests me about this is that you normally think of Stokowski as like the king of sensuous string timbre and rich sounds, but his arrangement begins with solo woodwinds exclusively, whereas Caplet's is far more monochrome as it proceeds. And I just think of the two that the Stokowski is not only more interesting purely as an orchestration, but it also, to me at least, sounds a bit truer to Debussy. Because you see, arranging piano music for the orchestra is a tricky thing. I actually think that Caplet's orchestration of the Children's Corner is a bit of a failure because, for example, let me just take another example from another work. When Ravel did Le Tombeau de Couperin, you may recall, he did not orchestrate all of the movements of the original piano suite. He only did the ones that he thought were best suited for orchestra. Now, Debussy's Children's Corner offers a similar challenge because there are a couple of movements. First, most obviously the first one, Dr. Gradus ad Parnassum, which it's a keyboard exercise. It really is. And there's very little for the left. I mean, I've played it. So the one Debussy piano work I actually played was the Children's Corner. And your left hand is basically just sitting there and the right hand is doing. But the point is, when you get to the climax of the work, when the whole thing is going, it's all in a steady pattern of notes. It's da 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 da, and the melody you sort of poke out while all the figuration is rippling around it. This is very easy to do on the orchestra because you just give, a bunch of the orchestra the part that has the tune, and everybody else accompanies at a more subdued level and on a different plane of tone. It is a big mistake, I think, to give all of that typically Debussy-ish rippling piano figuration, for example, to the harp, because there is no way that a harp in an orchestra is going to balance out what everyone else is doing. Whereas in the piano original, the whole thing exists on the same plane of tone. And it's the pianist who has to emphasize the melody through touch and articulation. And that creates an entirely different impression. It really does. The music seems to have much more substance, I think, in the piano version, because you can actually hear the melodic motion. and the motion of the notes, of all of the figuration that Debussy writes. The same is true in Snowflakes or Dancing. That's the toughest movement in the piece to play. And because it actually has, and for a similar reason, you have sort of offbeat figuration in the right and left hands going chugga 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 chugga, and with the thumbs, you're hitting a melody in long notes, and it gets more complicated than that as it goes. And it's quite tricky to play for the pianist. The orchestra can do it very, very simply, but it's so boring to hear just a melody in whole notes with this sort of vague, fuzzy stuff happening around it. And when I was doing this, it's like, listening to it, it's like, no, that's not what Debussy wrote, because it's totally different to hear a melody surrounded by the dancing snowflakes, which have substance, which have body, and which you barely hear at all in the orchestra because it softens the tone. I mean, Debussy was so precise in his aural imagination, and so when you're scoring these works for larger ensemble, the timbres that you choose have to respect the original. And, Debussy approved some of these things. He was obviously satisfied with it, but I'm not. And I'm the one who matters for this purpose. In any case, I mean, the Children's Corner is delightful. You may not even notice or care, but I think that there are real issues involved. And I was very, very impressed with how Stokowski actually stepped up to the plate in his version of Clair de Lune as compared with André Caplet, who is no slouch. Make no mistake, it's perfectly fine. But anyway, Yoav Talmi and the orchestra here, the Quebec Symphony Orchestra, Orchestra Symphonique de Québec, play this stuff absolutely beautifully, and they are gorgeously recorded. Beautiful. I mean, you heard some of that anyway in the samples that I played. But if you're looking for a really terrific single disc of the major works that get played as transcriptions and a couple rarities, then this disc on ATMA is absolutely the way to go. It will be a beautiful addition to your collection. So that's my recommendation. Thank you for joining me, folks. Keep on listening. Take care.